Hello, Dr. Ashwin Mehta. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Nolan. Thank you for having me.
Of course, and it's a pleasure to see you again virtually. I know we've connected in person at Learn Tech events in London, Brandon Hall. Always good to reconnect with you and have you on, and especially talking about a topic that I know you have definitely made a name for yourself in the L&D industry and the training and HR industry as well, on the topic of AI. Really, what we want to pick your brain on today is how do we get started with AI? And a lot of the conversations that I'm having with other CLOs and learning leaders is there's a lot of excitement and a lot of buzz around what we can do, and a lot of people have seen the tool, they've seen the tools, they've seen the strategies, they've seen the methodologies, but actually getting from zero to one, getting it started seems to be a big stumbling block for a lot. So that's what we're really talking about today. But let us just start maybe, Ashwin, with a state of the state. Like where do you see L&D now with AI? Where are we on the adoption cycle of AI in L&D?
So it's an interesting question, and we have to sort of set the context first, right? So what do we actually mean by AI in L&D? Now, most of the L&D departments that I've worked with in the past, most of the companies that I've worked with in the past have had some kind of AI already working for them. And if we think about the platform space specifically, a lot of companies have got LMSs or LXPs. They might have recommender engines. They might have some kind of search capability. Maybe they have pathway creation. Some of these things are, without anybody really calling them out, these are AI functionalities that are part of the bread and butter cycle of L&D, which is usually content, platforms, and then some kind of data. So it's easy to be scared off by the terminology, but it depends on what we mean, right? So if we first of all just put a pin in that, right? Traditional AI use cases in technology platforms, software as a service, SaaS products, have been around for many years, and L&D have been using them for making content accessible to their learners. So it's probably not a case where we're saying from scratch, nobody's ever used AI and now suddenly we have to go and use AI. So it's important to ground our conversation in that. Probably what we're talking about is generative AI, which people have been talking about for the last 2 years, the whole ChatGPT launch, Microsoft Copilot, Gemini, all of these kinds of things. And how do we start to use some of the tools around that? Now, if we take what I just said, so content, infrastructure, data, a very simplistic way to look at L&D. So L&D departments either use suppliers or do it themselves. They make some content. They put that content on a platform, and that learners access that content via that platform. When learners access content on a platform, that produces some data. So this is kind of the simplest way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Now, if we look at it in that very simplistic way, we need to be thinking about, first of all, purpose. We want to use generative AI. Why do we want to do that? Is there a reason? Are we gonna enrich the learning experience? Are we going to make more content? Are we going to reduce the cost base of L&D? Do we want to shift headcount into something else, like coaching, for example, and get the content production, digital content production side done by AI? So there needs to, first of all, be some kind of tangible reason for doing it, because that then guides you into what are you going to do. If you just jump into I'm going to do this thing,
yes,
without a purpose, then inevitably you're going to get it wrong.
Yeah, the foundational question of everything, and the whole real I think the first 5 episodes of the podcast were just all around like the performance led questioning in L&D, and like, why are we doing this? Let us not just do this to say that we did it. What is the actual performance metric that we're trying to improve?
Yeah.
And let's see if AI can help us get there. Absolutely.
And it gives a couple of interesting nuances to the discussion, because L&D generally speaking, has been incentivized to look at L&D metrics. So
Yep.
batch throughput or continuous throughput. What are we looking at as a factory, as a content factory? I produced 10 items last year. Now I want to produce 100 items. Amazing. That's one way of thinking about metrics. But we've long had this ambition in L&D. We must tie learning strategy to business strategy. So that starts to also, beg the question, well, what's the business doing with AI? What's the business doing with activities and tasks and roles? And which of these can be partly automated or can be partly served better by AI? And where do we need learning interventions that allow us to make digital media with AI? So two very different conversations there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why this purpose thing is so vitally important, because we need to figure out where are we going to deploy the best of the technology that we have available to us.
So when you start fractioning, when we start going down these two routes, right? But we have this one starting point, as we say, whatever route we want to go, we need to have a purpose to do anything that we do, right? It's going to seed our investments, seed our funding, and we've created two clear paths, and we've said, we've got these business metrics that we can entertain and help the business improve those, right? Maybe I'm going to implement a Gen AI bot. Maybe I'm going to implement a sales agent into my sales workforce where it can ask questions and get real-time answers and, create an actual sales pitch for my team, whatever it had be. That would improve things like average order value, time to sale, pipeline velocity, pipeline value, everything. And then we have the complete other side, which is, okay, how am I, building better ships? How am I building widgets faster, better, cheaper, whatever it is? There we have things like how quickly can we produce an hour of content or whatever it should be, or an asset.
Sure.
Out of those two areas, Ashwin, which one have you seen to be an easier path?
So it depends on with whom we are talking. If we're talking with L&D departments, the content production piece is way easier.
Right.
If we're talking with operations, then the other way is
right,
easier,
of course.
Right. So the locus of discussion changes what the discussion is about. But the reason I mentioned that is we should be integrated with what the operational side of businesses are doing, because ideally we want to be supporting the skills and the throughput and all of the things that operations do. So it's important to be involved in that discussion, or at least be aware of that discussion.
Yeah, I think one of the and this is a series. So for those that are listening now, if you like this will be a part of a series. I know one of the other things that we'll talk about is kind of the future of AI and how that sets your path. And I think that absolutely holds true. Is that before maybe. Even though you can't really boil the ocean and want to look 30 years in advance, there is a lot of value before you even start. If we're talking about how do I go from 0 to 1 in AI, just even spending a couple hours with some other executives, understanding where the business is headed and where the technology is headed. Although you may have no intention to get there in the next year, the next 2 years, it definitely is a good foundation of how you want to structure which of these paths am I going to go down? Where should I seed investment today? Versus what are the things when I hear about them? It's kind of nice to know, but I'm not going to tackle it right now, because I feel like in a lot of organizations, sometimes choosing what not to do becomes a harder conversation than what to do.
Absolutely. And I think we'll touch a bit more on this when we talk about data in one of our other discussions. But yeah, so first of all, we have purpose. What are we actually trying to do? If we are trying to go down the content route, I know you guys have got significant content studio capability. So we probably start to go down the road of, well, which content or media development tools are we going to start to use? And there can be quite a landscape of those tools. I'll probably talk about that in two different parts. So part one is, what are the tools we're going to use? This tends to be the bit that everybody gets really excited about. Is my tool going to get mentioned, or am I going to be able to make video more effectively, or whatever it is, right? And the reality of the situation is there are lots of tools out there. There are benchmarks for different tools, and some of them are in the video production space, some of them are in the image generation space, some of them are in the avatar space. But if we take the very basic use case of an e-learning developer, right? Usually they use something like Articulate or
Hmm.
um, Captivate or Elucidate or some
Yeah,
authoring tool,
authoring
right?
tool.
Now, I think it was last month maybe that Articulate has entered the AI race.
Hmm.
So they've said, right, we've got an integration with OpenAI or whatever it is that they do. I haven't really looked into it in much detail, but they now have AI capability. Now, a lot of the other tools that we generally tend to use um, in the video production or maybe the avatar space, so Synthesius, Colossians, Hour One, all of these tools, they've had this kind of capability for quite a while, where even beyond in the animation
Yeah,
space,
true.
they've had these capabilities where even though L&D departments were probably using these tools anyway, AI snuck in and you can go in and create a course from basically not that much. Say, make me a course on X, and it will make the scene structure for you. And that's when you say, what's the easiest step to getting into using AI in your workflows? The tools that you're using probably already have some AI capability. Figure out which tools do and which tools don't, and make sure you're using them to the the most or the least of however you want to use them for your purpose. So relate it back to that purpose.
Hmm.
So that's probably the easiest step. But the reason I said I'll split that into two parts of a discussion is that with great power comes great responsibility, etc. But with tools comes a little bit of governance. So we need to be thinking about, in an enterprise sense, most enterprises have got some kind of governance around how do we implement technology tools into our environment. And with that, it's helpful to understand the tools that you already have, now they have new functionality. Does it still meet your governance? Are there still things that, are permissible within what was assessed in terms of risk? So are you releasing any of your data into the wild? Is everything still
Hmm.
secure? These kinds of considerations need to be made. And that's the simplest step. So use what you're already using. It's probably got AI in it.
Yeah.
Now, governance tools, if we start to think about now we're gonna evolve, we're gonna look at a slightly different tool set. So moving outside of the e-learning development world, you have a lot of tools that are, for example, the mid journeys of this world or things like Runway and Flux,
Correct.
where you're starting to be able to manipulate images and create images and then create videos from images. So you create a sense of movement. And Adobe made an announcement, I think, last week, where they were looking at rotating 2D images, and it does that. And
Yeah.
so they had like a little guy that was fighting a dragon, and the sprite of the guy was facing the camera, and he said, "Well, we want him to look at the dragon, so we'll just turn him around," and it just did it, right?
Oh, wow.
So that's actually quite impressive, right? It was just a cartoon figure, but doing that is quite impressive. So you start to get some of these other capabilities, and if we look at the Photoshop side of things, so the Adobe suite,
Yeah.
editing, video editing or image editing, there's a lot of generative capability in those things now. So we start to build a landscape, and I'm not particularly calling out tools for any reason, other than just to say what we have now is we have a landscape of media generation tools, all of which have amazing capabilities compared to what they had 2 or 3 years ago. And they all have a little bit of additional governance that's needed around them. Now, the reason for keep mentioning governance is some enterprises that I've worked with have been fairly blasé about, you can just
Hmm.
go and use tools and we'll deal with it later.
Yeah.
Use it,
Yeah.
use it for a pilot and it's fine.
Right.
Some organizations, and particularly regulated organizations, are very strict around, you cannot bring anything into the environment
Correct.
unless you've done lengthy and detailed governance around where data centers are and how data is processed and all of these kinds of things. So it depends on the risk appetite of your business as to, which of these routes is going to be applicable in your context.
So, and this is where I remember I was having a conversation with someone maybe a year ago, and I was showing them our tool, just for generative AI, like a copilot, but with a lot of learning elements added into it, right? to help with prompt engineering and to help create storyboards, video scripts, and things like that. And we were kind of showing the flow of, okay, first we use this generative AI content tool to actually tell us what to do, right? We load in product manuals and everything like that. Essentially, we're trying to democratize the SME, right?
Hmm.
Everybody has this big problem of all this knowledge is locked in my SMEs. Well, with AI, you can take a 10,000 word document, find the answer within a second, and then go to your SME and say, hey, just validate. Is this right or wrong? Versus tell me everything on the 10,000 page document. But I digress. So I was showing them our tool for that. And then I went to Colossian and I said, now you can take this and look at, you can just create this avatar. Then you can take that video and that avatar and you can convert it into any languages, and then you export it into SCORM, and then you can create a different e-learning on this tool. And kind of the question was, what is your advice when it comes to using this tool for this and this tool for this and this tool for this versus a best in breed? And the question was, isn't Articulate just going to come out with something that has all of it in house? And I think as us that follow the tech space know that those are traditionally the laggards because they can't afford to get it wrong. They can't
Yeah.
afford to launch AI and it blow up in their face, or to give all, for a security breach and now everything is gone. And so them launching it this last month, I think a lot of people have it in their idea of, can I get away with just a tool? Have you, and the tool space is so evolving. Are you a proponent of a best of breed, where you get, the best AI, the best video tool, the best content tool, the best Photoshop tool, the best avatar tool? Or are you more of the irk of, let us do it all in one shop. Let's use Articulate and let's do everything Articulate has. If it doesn't exist in Articulate, we are
Mm.
not going to onboard it. Have you advised people in one way or the other, or seen an approach that works better for one person or the next?
There's not really a one size fits all. And the reason is that we have to go back to the purpose, think about learning
Mm-hmm.
strategy, right? Now, some learning departments will have a very small group of learners and they want very high quality experiences. Some learning departments will be serving hundreds of thousands of learners and
Mm-hmm.
want to focus on scale. So for these kinds of reasons, we need to focus on the strategy of the business and what works for that business. Generally, I would say that, I mean, we're still only talking about development. We've got a lot
Yeah.
of other things to
Yeah.
consider as well. Uh, in the development space, I think all of the learning designers I know would be like, well, what about design? We've got to think about design, right?
Right.
So we'll talk about that in a second. But in the development space, you could, and this is generally what I think, that you could say, well, what I need is one good image generator. I need
Yeah.
one good video creator. I need one shell that's capable of giving me, first draft, here's a bunch of scenes, and then and maybe an avatar tool and maybe a couple of other things. But you say, well, these are my typical pedagogies. This is usually what I do in terms of design. I'm looking at scenario-based or experiential learning or problem-based learning, or whatever it is that suits the appetite and suits the mode of my business.
Mm-hmm.
These are the things that reach my learners because we're effectively in a competitive space. We're competing for attention.
Correct.
We're competing with work priorities, with other things that go on in people's lives. And generally, what we're trying to do is make a stimulus that reaches a person such that when they receive that stimulus, they somehow create knowledge in their minds and they go off and do different things than when they did before. And we can borrow a lot of things from the field of marketing in this respect, because marketing, they're reaching out to people and they're trying to influence behavior through the use of media. That's basically what we're doing, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the marketing space, you think about adverts, they are competing with other products. We are competing for time. So if we're competing for time, then we need to be leveraging the best of our creative design capabilities with a typical range of tools that those folks want to use. So depends on your business, but it also depends on your designers, right? And that's why we then move into the design phase of things.
Yeah. And what my advice to people, I mean, in general with tools, as well as somebody who's led the our marketing stack and our tech stack and built an LMS and an LXP. I just I'm always of the advice that find a software that solves a big pain point and does that really well. Don't worry about the edge cases. Don't worry about the things that you rarely use. Like, you go back to purpose. If you have a ton of avatars in your training mix in your library, and you're using avatars and you've got different languages, find a tool that allows you to shrink that production by 30%. That will they'll easily pay for that tool. Don't worry about, well, can Articulate also do it, or can this tool also do it? I mean, if as you said, if your in-house tools can, so be it, but find the tool that works for you today and has a little bit of right in the future. I think what happened to a lot of organizations that I've talked to in this past year, right? Because as you said, we're kind of on a 2-year cycle now, and we're in the second year. As I started talking to people, year one was a lot of like, what is this? Skepticism. Now a lot of this is more like, how do I get started? Skepticism versus what is this skepticism? And I think a lot of organizations punted because they were just afraid to choose the wrong tool or choose the wrong thing. When if they would have just started, even the inefficiencies of starting, even the inefficiencies of choosing the wrong tool or the wrong platform at this point would have been greatly outweighed by the results that they would have had if they would have just gone with one and said, even if we just use it for a year, 6 months, it pays for itself. So, so we covered that step. Now, what's next? So we've talked about the development, and you mentioned, hey, we have this whole other steps that come. What's the next one?
Just one more point on the tool thing. Now, if you do what you've said, and I remember, as you can see, I do music, right? So I remember back in the day when we used to have this Cubase versus Pro Tools debate, right? So some people were using Pro Tools and some people were using Cubase, and this was your digital audio workstation, and they worked quite differently. The interfaces were different. Where are the buttons? How do I get it to do this or that or the other? How do I add channels? So all of the functionality was very different, and it was a different skill set to use one software versus another. Now, generally, this is something we would think about if we have a sprawling software landscape. But nowadays, that's not really true, because user interfaces and mechanisms have kind of converged. So most of the softwares look very, very similar. So the skill set required to pick up a new bit of software and then go and use it is much lower than it used to be. So that's one point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
software
very good point. I know that I still get ridiculed for it. I use this very terrible graphic design tool called paint.net, and I do it because it's free, and I've been using it since college. It's not that my company won't pay for Adobe, and I know the tools, but this software at this point is probably 30, 40 years old. Like you said, they divert. Like, it used to be that, yes, you either could do one or the other, and learning that had a huge adoption. We just became partners with Colossian. Zero training. I just went to the tool and started poking around, and I was able to get it done within 30 minutes. So yeah, absolutely agree there.
Very user-friendly.
Yeah.
So let's pivot slightly to design, right? Because we're still in the tech space at the moment. Now, design is, again, something you guys do. So you do your analysis, design, development, the usual kind of waterfall addy. Now, for folks who do that, the thinking part of it, you mentioned SMEs earlier. So your experts, the people who will possibly want to work with you to provide expertise into some kind of learning intervention. Now, those folks, usually their time is, precious. They have lots of other competing demands. So in a business, do we want them to be creating a first draft of something? Now, what we said in the previous section was that a lot of the tools and technologies that are out there have some kind of capability of creating a shell, creating a first draft of a script, creating something that hopefully minimizes this burden. But what if they don't? How do you get your designers to be working back and forth with some of the foundational models to be thinking about pedagogy, to be thinking about that first draft, to be thinking about objectives and satisfying those objectives, and all of the things that we, hold near and dear as some of the key points in that development journey that starts with analysis and goes through design. These are content pieces, right? And I'm by no means saying that, content is the way forward, but I'm saying that for those who are still making content, then not only thinking about media development, but thinking about the entirety of the journey is potentially a way forward to starting with AI. So for the audience, has anybody tried using all of these tools? Have you used ChatGPT to produce yourself a design, an outline, a first draft of a script? Because this kind of thing is quite easy. You mentioned prompt engineering earlier, and with a little bit of experimentation and, dare I say it, maybe a little bit of online discovery, look on YouTube or Coursera or anything for prompt engineering courses. There are thousands of them out there. But you can figure out pretty quickly that you can start to streamline your process that goes from an expert or a business demand or something that you need as an intervention through to something that is, almost the first draft. You can take that process and use a lot of AI to get there.
Yeah, and I think so. I'm implementing this internally at Infopro right now in a couple of our kind of back office cycles, and I realized, I kind of needed to take a little bit of my own advice. Is at first I was like, oh well, maybe I can just wait for the Copilot, our corporate org to have Copilot and start loading our assets and make it our own. But then I realized, like, the ability for me to build out my own world in Copilot, or my own world within whatever, Claude, whatever Gen AI tool that you're allowed to use, is not very complicated. And I realized that most of the options out there to get me from 0 to 90% there, or 80% there, even if it gets you 50% there, that's a hell of a lot of time, is not a lot of effort, and it takes no code. You don't know develop. You don't have to understand code, understand development at all. It takes some basic understanding of how the whole Gen AI process works. But if you do, you can build yourself a working model that gets you really far, really, really fast. But for those that might be scared to start, like, what are those areas that are scary for people that are thinking, like, what is on the minds of people that aren't doing it? You think that it might be roadblocked for them to start down there?
It's a whole variety of things, to be honest. So some organizations early on, when, November 22, and we were all able to play with ChatGPT a little bit.
Yeah.
A lot of organizations, not a lot, but some organizations decided, no, nobody can use this. We don't know enough about the risks. We don't know enough about the security. So no one can use it. And that was, for those organizations, I'm sure that was the right decision. But with that then comes a little bit of fear in the worker population, because messages don't always trickle through the organization in the same way. So we have this very strong mandate. Nobody touch this stuff, right? And then we have maybe the trickle through of, actually, we can use it for a little bit of this or a little bit of that. Those messages have trickled through a lot less strongly than the mandate to say no, because mandates to say no tend to be
correct. Yeah.
Very widely spread, right?
Yeah.
So you have a little bit of that kind of fear of, well, you said no, you said don't touch the button, and now you're saying it's okay to touch the button. I don't know if the button's hot or not, right? Yeah. Why would I touch this? So you've got this natural human inclination to say, well, should I really do this?
Yeah.
Which is potentially healthy, right? Because if we get onto the topic of AI skills a little bit there, because if your organization as a whole is AI literate, then you can have the robust and sometimes thorough discussion with people around, you can use AI in these use cases. We don't want you to use it in these other use cases. Maybe it's useful for X and maybe it's not useful for something else. or maybe we want everybody to be experimenting. So whatever the organization is saying that it wants people to do, that needs to be accompanied with a baseline of AI literacy such that people understand those messages and can then go and action them for competitive advantage in the business.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of one reason why some of the adoption has been a little bit low. Other businesses, of course, have been very quick to adopt and say, everybody go and play, because it's going to affect our position in the market, and we want to be the best, or whatever the position of the business is at the time. So we want everybody to play, go and invent and experiment, and that's also fine. But the skills point, I think, it not only comes from this idea of let's say no and make sure that people don't play with it, but also media scaremongering and things. So if people aren't working with AI, they're not using AI at work, they're not really using it at home either. You get a lot of noise, a lot of chatter. Then maybe it becomes a thing that you don't want to do. And I think the last point is around things like self-confidence, self-efficacy, right? So AI seems this big scary thing. I don't know how to use it. Should I try to use it? Am I going to need to learn coding to use it, right?
Yeah.
So you've got all of these things as well. And the reality of the situation, as I said at the start of this conversation, is probably most of the things you're used to using have some AI in them anyway.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that caught to my mind was within our LMS and our LXP, one of our selling points, I mean, even 5 years ago, we were using intelligent search to give it better answers, and implementing LLMs and things like that within the tool to help create a better response. And that was a big selling point, and I don't think people really thought of it as, well, this is AI, but it really, I mean, it's not a script. It wasn't enter X, it outputs Y. It was enter a string of things, and we'll gradually get better over time. So I think a lot of that stigma is there. And maybe speaking of that, maybe we're jumping too far back, but what have you seen as a good advice for maybe L&D organizations in particular that are kind of in that space, whether it's at the CLO level, or maybe you're a CLO yourself and you sense that this is happening, in those layers below? What have you seen as a good tool to break down those barriers a little bit?
Well, the best tool is education, right? So we're in the learning space, and the cobbler's children have the worst shoes, right? So we need to be ensuring that the L&D organization is equipped with the skills and the awareness of what's happening, and the luxury. Let's face it, it is a luxury to be able to innovate and experiment with the different things that are out on the market, because there's not really. There are plenty of courses out there. You can go and do a course, but if you go and experiment and you play and you figure out what is useful and what doesn't work for you, then you've learned probably quite a lot during just doing that research for yourself. Yeah. So I would generally encourage people to go and play. And that's not exclusive to the foundational models, because a lot of the market tools have, free trials and things like that, which encourage you to play with them. So all of those things are possible.
That's how I built my first e-learning course in AI. Is we had this. I don't know if you know of Splice Knowledge. I don't know if you've used those gentlemen, but they had touted in a meeting of mine of essentially tell it the course you wanted to create, load some assets, and it will create an e-learning course. And I thought, I don't know way it's going to actually do that. I didn't believe it, so I went and did it, and I loaded it in. And what it did for me is one, it kind of showed me, as you mentioned, and I think it's a really important point, and I hope a lot of people take it, is, well, Ashwin had said, a lot of the technologies are similar now, so it decreases that user adoption. But what it also does is, even if you do play around and you go experiment with whatever, Clossian, Slice, whatever, the likelihood of, even if you don't land on that tool, even if you go with the other tool, it's going to be similar. And you actually understand the fundamental layer of how these organizations are structuring the automation and the AI within this space. And so there is a ton of learning. And I remember that I gathered understanding, okay, what is the step-by-step process that they're going to want to take me down to build this course? And how much of it is am I going to build it all and then just start removing things? Am I going to build it first and then add the images? Is it going to add the images? So much of that you learn just by playing, and the act of playing actually is how you learn. So it's so connected. I think that's really good advice. Especially for those that are in kind of the development, production, delivery, or design space. Just go get some free trial. Just about every SaaS product out there is going to have a free trial, and encourage them to leverage one and come back and give you the pros and cons. That's what we did internally at Infopro Learning when this started back in November a couple of years ago. We said, go play, come back, and every week somebody reported on a new tool and said, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. Tremendous lessons there.
Absolutely. And obviously, if it's a free trial and you don't like the product, then don't forget to cancel it at the end. Right? Yeah. We're all guilty of that. So that's effectively content development, content design, and working back and forth with not only market tools, but also working back and forth with foundational models, GPTs, copilots, and things like that. As we move into more complex space, we start to, back to the purpose, right? We start to think about slightly different purposes now, because what we started this discussion with was how do we use AI to make content? We talked about platforms, content platforms, data. But if we move away from that paradigm for a second, right? So we make content, which is the stimulus for people to go and learn something. And then hopefully they learn that and then go and apply it and they practice and hone that skill.
Yeah.
If we move away from that paradigm for a second towards the probably more realistic paradigm now, that we've got co-pilots, right? We've got, if you're a Microsoft house, you've got Copilot. If you're a Google house, probably you've got Gemini. And ChatGPT and, all of the others, Claude. Now, in all of these models, you start to get a tiering structure, right? And that tiering structure is where you say, well, if I have Copilot, I can ask it questions. As an L&D person, you might want to ask it to make content designs. But we start to jump to a state where actually your learners have access to Copilot. So if they want to know something, are they really going to stop what they're doing, go to an LMS, find an e-learning course, sit through 15 minutes of click next e-learning, right? I'm not saying it's going to be that bad, but you get the idea.
Yeah.
We're moving further and further away from the idea of accessing information in the flow of work. When we have the capability with Copilot and Gemini and all of these things to access that information. So there's probably a point at which L&D departments need to work with IT departments to figure out, well, how are we going to embed the skills, the basic literacy in terms of AI and data, because you can't really underplay the importance of data when it comes to AI. How are we going to embed all of these skills in our organization such that people can start to be creative with whatever tool set we have embedded in the organization, productivity tools? So that's a very different way to think about it, and it starts to move away from the idea of content. And if you're doing that, then you start to move into the territory of, we're going to use foundation models. We're going to use things like retrieval augmented generation for supplying a foundation model with our company data in a secure way, and then allowing the responses to be way more contextual and way more accurate relating to our processes. Now, everything I've just said, now this starts to move from the idea that I can just use the tools that I have and they've got a little bit of AI in them, first steps, to maybe second or third steps, where you want to be thinking about something that's a little bit more complicated. Now, depending on the organization, you might have an implementation of something, OpenAI or Microsoft, that allows you to put documents in and get a response back, so everybody can do that. You might want to be making some bespoke agents to support people with specific things. And this is where you start to get into this territory of, well, is this scary? Do I need support? Right. Is this going to require some coding? Is it going to require X, Y, and Z, right? And you start to get into this. Now there's a barrier to entry. With that barrier to entry, of course, comes, how do I do it? Do I need people in my organization? Do I need to liaise with IT? Do I need a supplier to do this? So this starts to be a little bit more difficult. And that's why I say this starts to be a step 2 discussion rather than a first steps discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, when we started off and we said, let us understand the kind of the landscape of AI. I really do think that's part of, even if what we're talking about now and creating an agent for people to answer questions, even if that seems 5 years out in advance, it's important to know that it exists today and know that is the step 2 or the step 3, wherever you might be, because that is the eventuality of it. I mean, there's I'm sure once Google was created and then subsequently Wikipedia, encyclopedia sales and library visits probably shrank. And now, now people go to libraries for completely different reasons. Me and my family go probably once a week, but it's rarely because that's where the stuff is to get the answers that we're looking for. We go because we live in northern Idaho. It's dark and cold at 4 p.m. and we got to go somewhere with the kids to prevent them from tearing our house up. And it's a nice, peaceful place to go and hang out and, have them draw or whatever it is. So it's important to know that's where it is headed. And as you said, so that's the one thing that I'm doing right now. I realize getting my agent to like a 1.0, right? Load in my documents and get an answer. I can do that relatively easily. Anybody can honestly, do that. Yeah. But then how do I serve it to my people? Where does my agent live, right? In my case, I'd like it to live in Microsoft. I'd like the agent to be in Teams, which is something that a lot of organizations are implementing now within their whatever their, Slack, Teams, whatever it is. And that becomes, and I remember we had about a couple of years back, we implemented a bot on top of a chatbot on top of our LMS and our LXP. But then we realized that it was much more valuable if it wasn't just pulling in what was in the LMS, but sources from everywhere else. But then that created this whole other problem of, well, if it's pulling in the information from everywhere, where is this bot best served? Where should it actually sit? Because let's face it, it's very rare that when an employee has a question, they go to their LMS for an answer.
Absolutely.
They have 10,000 other places they go to.
Well, this is going to be probably one of the key considerations for the industry over the next, let's say, 5 years, for argument's sake. That's what I said earlier, the existing paradigm, content infrastructure data, content platform data, effectively. That paradigm actually goes away if we adopt a Copilot model.
Yeah.
And I mean Copilot, not in the Microsoft sense, but where humans work with AI as their supporting agents. So it's going to be something we will all need to consider. It's something the platform manufacturers are, of course, considering how do they, augment their offering to make it more rounded. So yes, it's a thing that we need to consider. Absolutely. Yeah. In the space of where does it live? Because that's something that you mentioned. Where does it live has got so many different answers, right?
Yeah.
And it's got answers because it's where agents live. It could be, where are you hosting it? How is it being accessed? So all of these things are slightly different ways to think about it. In the Microsoft sense, if you are using Microsoft, you're using Windows, you can use Copilot through Edge. So effectively, you have access within the tools that you're using. The Wave 2 announcement from Microsoft, whenever that was, 2 months ago or something, that had Copilot integration with most of the Office suite. So you had, Word and PowerPoint and Excel and all of these things have Copilot functionality. So to some degree, they're ahead of the curve in solving some of those issues. Um, if you're building your own, which is kind of what you were saying, if you're building your own, where does that live? That, again, depends on your organizational setup.
Yeah.
And it depends on how you're building it.
And the interesting thing is, it used to be you had to have it almost live, or like you had to have it live in one place, because the idea of it living in multiple places meant it was going to be serving up, it was going to create this never ending, what would you call it? Like,
Version control.
like string theory, right? It's going to create so many different theory versions of itself, and you're never actually going to know where it ends. But today, with how connected everything is, I guess the question more is like, well, where wouldn't you want it to live? And it should live everywhere. So, is there one more component we want to discuss, Asher, or should we kind of come back now and kind of re-outline and summarize, or is there another component you wanted to touch on?
So the key components: strategy, purpose. Make sure you're doing something purposeful, right? Make sure you have the right governance in place. If you're using technology, make sure that you've surveyed the market and you know what's out there. Data is something we need to touch on, but we'll do that in another session.
Yes.
Because data is the fuel for the AI engine, and that's
Absolutely.
quite a big topic. And then we touched a little bit on the idea of AI and data literacy, and that kind of culture of innovation that marries itself with skills that are required by the business. So I would say the key factors to consider if you're going to be implementing AI are those: so strategy, governance, technology, data, culture, and skills. But how each of those manifests in an organization is ever so slightly different, depending on, of course, things like business strategy, risk appetite, regulation, the underlying culture, and the baseline of literacy in the organization. So it's difficult to say there's a one size fits all, but I would say everybody should be considering these things. And that's not only for AI implementation for L&D, it's also how the L&D departments serve their organization and align to business strategy. And it's also for AI implementation company-wide. So this is tech strategy now. So the factors will be the same. The considerations will be different.
Yeah, and I think, very early on in my marketing career, I was fortunate enough to go out to dinner with the owner of our company, and he just, he owns our company, which is attached to 2 or 3 others. So, I'm essentially a spec in this organization at this point. And he's talking to me, and he says, Nolan, what is the value of a lead to you? What does it cost? Do you know how much you spend on just a lead, or the inverse of that, actually, and how much money you generate from that said lead? And he's like, if you don't know that, you can't diagnose any problems associated to that. It's impossible for you to actually determine what that problem is, or what the payoff is for solving that said problem. And I feel like so many companies, if they started with that, phase 0 of why am I doing this? If you put a dollar figure or whatever some financial figure, or head count, whatever it is, attached to what does this improvement in AI bring to my organization? You have the direction where the business is going and where they want to go. But then if you take a financial analysis of what could this do to my organization, my department, whether that's learning, HR, marketing, sales, whatever it is, and you actually start putting dollars and cents behind the problem, I've always found that those problems become much more real and much more important for you to solve and for your organization to solve, versus just oh yeah, if I got this done, I'd be able to create assets quicker. Well, what does 30% faster mean? What is your dollar? Like, what is the dollar? What is the payoff at the end of the day? And I always feel like if you can really nail that, it actually helps facilitate and grease the wheels for everything that comes later.
I think I would make that slightly wider and say, if we take this to the the L&D development side of things, which is what we've talked about over the last 40-50 minutes or so. If we take it there and we say, forget AI. Just let's not talk about AI for a second.
Yeah.
Let's just talk about the principles of what we do. Now, the principles of what we do, we are going to spend some money for an intervention, which means other people have to spend their time, right? We spend money so people can spend their time. That's all cost. There's a cost associated with all of that. Now, if we're going to spend company money, which all of this is,
Yep.
why are we doing it? What are we measuring? And do we routinely, if let's say I'm making one e-learning course, 30-minute course for
Yeah.
argument's sake, 1,000 people are going to do a 30-minute course. Great. Right. We've spent 500 hours now. Now, what was the reason for doing that? The reason for doing that should be measured in some way. So are we doing A/B testing or, pre-post testing or something
Yep.
that says there was a business metric, there was something around the time it takes to do a particular operation, the number
Yep.
of sales calls we made in a particular month, whatever it happens to be, something that's operationally measurable should be different after we've spent this particular amount of time, and we should be able to measure it afterwards, pre and post. Or we have two groups, an intervention group and a non-intervention group, and we compare them after the intervention. So we've got like an A/B style
Yeah.
test.
Yeah.
Now, this is, I'm describing this, and it's fairly basic stuff. And you're saying, yeah, right. But how many of all of your clients, you've got a lot of clients, right? Infopro Learning, you go
Yep.
and make e-learning for lots of clients. Every single bit of e-learning that you've made should have a measurement behind it. How many of them do?
Yeah. That is the subject of, I think I've done at least 7 podcasts on just
Yeah.
this one topic. When I started in this industry 14 years ago, I think that was what actually I encouraged our company to pin itself on. It was our
Mm.
tagline, learning for performance, for a long time.
Mhm.
You know what? Interestingly enough, so we did a lot of things to try to step people there, right? So we created something called an outcome success plan, where we say,
Sure.
if we do X, we will do Y, categorically, like at a program level, not at
Mm.
a 30-minute asset level, but at a program level, because we realized that was an easier starting point. And we still didn't quite. I don't know. It was still tough, I think, to go back and to get the data. You mentioned data. To get the data ahead of time, most of the conversations were wanted to go like, well, we'll see what happens once it's done. And it's like, well,
Mm.
we need to know where we are today, and we need to know where we want to go so that we can design the program to get it, versus design the program and then afterwards take a look at a couple things and see what moved. Oddly enough, Ashwin, what moved the needle the most, which was a really interesting concept, is we started going to our clients and saying, listen, we think this program should win a Brandon Hall Award. Because most companies that come to us are doing large things. They're not like, hey, 30-minute here.
Sure.
It's a large initiative they want to do. And we said, this should win a Brandon Hall Award. But to do so, the number one component, or not the, it's one of the 5, but it's the big, they say, hey, this is the number, this is what we're going to focus on, is what is the impact? And so that little thing of, we're going to do this Brandon Hall Award, but if we do it, we have to know the impact. So we got to know where are we today and where are we going? Oddly enough, that has had the biggest impact on actually creating that incentive for a lot of our customers. And I think it's because it is a framework, it is a foundation. And I think there's still a little bit of, I don't know if fear is not the right word. I don't know what it is. Like, you kind of are sticking your neck out there when you go to sales and say, what metrics do you want me to improve with this course? Because you're naturally implying that they should get better once they're done. And so you're sticking your neck out there a little bit.
Well, the reason I mention it is the obvious question with AI is going to be, well, what are we trying to change? How do we measure that this has actually been successful when we've done it? And if we're not in the routine, if we're not actually in that routine of asking those questions and getting those answers and measuring things when we do regular non-AI interventions, then this stuff isn't going to get better once we start throwing additional tech at it.
Yeah, then you're the same company that spent $1 million on AR headsets just because you wanted to see what it would do.
Yeah,
And that's never
exactly.
the good strategy. Well, what a great way to end an hour, coming all the way back to the beginning, almost like a Christopher Nolan directed podcast. Thanks, Ashwin, for this series. And those that like this, again, this is a series. Please do look out our channel on Spotify and go to our social on LinkedIn. You'll see our other sessions posted here. Absolutely phenomenal content. Thank you again, Dr. Ashwin Mehta, for joining us today. Look forward to the next one.
Thank you, Nolan. Thanks for having me.